where did this begin? Where did Leonardo come from? Because this is the first time that Florentine Films has strayed outside of American history. And it's for, as it turns out, a Florentine,
Yes.
Leonardo da Vinci.
Yes, it seems very fitting that Florentine Films would have a subject based in Florence, Italy, although that's not why Florentine Films is called Florentine Films. So we could get to that later or not.
Oh,
The
it's just a little
origins,
kismet, this little synchronicity.
Mhm. The origin story of this project is that in 2017, Ken was at work on a film about Ben Franklin, and he was having dinner with Walter Isaacson, one of his advisors and the author of a Ben Franklin biography. And Walter was writing a biography about Leonardo, and over the course of dinner, kept pushing Ken that he should make a film about Leonardo da Vinci. And Ken resisted, I think instinctively. He hasn't ever done, as you said, a subject set overseas. But after the dinner, he called me and my wife, Sarah, who is Ken's daughter, and said, Walter really thinks we should do Leonardo. What do you guys think? And we said, we should do Leonardo. And so that's where it all began. That was 7 years ago.
It is not like Florentine hasn't done subjects where there isn't a lot of archival video or stuff like, the Civil War or stuff like that. But I don't think you've ever gone this far back in time.
No, we haven't. I mean, Ken might argue that his national park series does touch
Mm.
on layers of geology that take us back billions of years, or to the beginning of the planet. But in this case, no. And that was one of the attractions of this project, in part, was the absence of any material photographs or footage that would normally drive the films that Sarah and I make with Ken. There are a handful of likenesses of Leonardo probably drawn by apprentices. In one case, there's a suspicion that maybe it's a self-portrait. So we weren't going to really be able to see him. And so instead, the focus was on getting in between his ears. And we found, that the notebooks were really going to help us be able to do that because he left behind many thousands of pages that capture what he was working on, all of his various subjects, whether it was geology or flight or water dynamics, preparatory studies for his various paintings, that there's all such great detail, all his thinking about that subject, whatever it is, he poured into each of these little sketches. And then there's often text accompanying it that explains in a form that he almost certainly meant for a reader of a published work by him, what it is he was thinking and why he was doing what he was doing. And so he's not a guy who left behind a lot of writing, very little writing about what he was thinking about this, about, who he had dinner with last night. He's not a diarist, but in those notebooks are everything that he was thinking about what he was working on. And we just thought that could be our pole star. And we'll just use these notebooks and we can do a personal journey across his entire life and help people understand what was going on in his head.
I know that he did it all in mirror writing. Um, I can mirror write. I can mirror write backwards and forwards at the same time. Makes me
Amazing.
dizzy though. It makes me think that if I don't know how unusual the ability is, um, but it let because I know that I have an issue with left and right, which
Yeah.
may be the same wiring or lack of good wiring. So I think it might mean that your brain is wired a little differently, that you see things at a little bit of, which may be why he was able to conceive of all these things that he didn't have the power, the technology, the ability to bring into reality. That he was just that kind of a thinking machine.
Yeah, I think that, he had an incredible processor, no question. Unique among people of the last 2,000 years for sure. I think his genius is also rooted in a kind of ability to stay longer, look longer, think
Mm-hmm.
more deeply about what he's observing. I mean, he was a guy who wanted to understand nature to the extent that he could know all the rules of it and then apply it to whatever it is he was working on, whether it's a painting where he's trying to understand atmospheric perspective in the background, or some kind of mechanical innovation where the spiral of the snail shell has helped him to understand how he wants the design to look, that he's just going to go deeper and stay longer and look longer than the next person. And I think that it's that sort of obsessiveness, to be honest. It's that he's using 70% of his brain where maybe we're using 10% of ours. And also this profound imagination that he could see problems that existed in the mechanical design where no one else had even imagined that mechanical design. And so and that makes him very modern too. It feels like he's from our time, the
And
depths of his imagination.
In a weird way, it kind of reminds me of Moneyball,
Hmm.
how the people came up with this idea of digging into the statistics of sports and finding patterns that might not have been obvious
Yeah.
because we now have these statistics and the ability to compile them and crunch numbers that sometimes you just have to wait for reality to catch up with imagination.
Yeah, I
And
love that analogy. In part because those sabermetrics folks in baseball were looking at the same game that everyone had looked at for 100 years.
yep.
He's looking at the same wisdom that has been handed down the years from the ancients. He's looking at the same natural environment that people in Tuscany had been looking at forever, and yet he's seeing different layers than others had seen, and he's processing them in a different way. And so out is coming a different theory about why things are the way they are.
I think sometimes people get too lost in theories and philosophy and just forget I should just go out and see the way things happen.
Totally.
Rather than having a theory about the way things happen, first go out and see how they actually happen and then draw from there.
Yeah, I think so. I think, for a guy who was, born out of wedlock in Vinci, in Tuscany, outside of Florence, he's unable to have the same classical education that many of his peers who were of his station. His family had money. His father was a notary. His father got him his first gig
And it
at
wasn't like he
brokerage.
was tossed aside,
Oh,
but
no.
he didn't
Mm-mm.
have all the advantages.
No, instead, he's left to wander nature. He had an uncle who he adored who would take him on walks or whatever it was. It was kind of a life of leisure on this farm in many ways. But there he is in the Vinci countryside, beginning to write at a young age, study nature in a way that he would across his entire life. And so it begins to give him a sense that experience, being out in the world, observing things, coming to your own conclusions about what it is, will be valuable for him in a professional life later.
And then as an artist, I'm thinking that some of what we lose in a lot of non-figurative modern art, abstract modern art, is that's all from inside the imagination, within someone's head, very solipsistic in a way. But we lose the idea of being able to see something and then represent it, to find a way to recreate nature, whether it's in sculpture or painting or whatever it is. And almost like we've almost lost the appreciation for the ability to do that. And when you look at something like Michelangelo's David or Da Vinci's paintings and his drawings, you see like that is an amazing thing to render nature. And it's
Absolutely.
biology and it's physics and it's
Mhm.
all of that stuff.
And math, and that's for those artists who came up at that time at the height of the Renaissance. Art was sort of still an artisanal thing. They would be working in a bottega. The master would get commissions. They would be from a church. They would be from merchants. But it was about churning out those things that could then hang in the cathedral or hang
Mm-hmm.
in the wealthy merchant's palazzo. And Leonardo is getting the same commission, so he's painting the same Last Supper that many churches had commissioned other painters to paint. But he's applying everything that you just discussed to his own understanding of what's happening in that moment that he's
Plus
read about in the
psychology.
Bible. Yeah, the depths, he's thinking, wow, okay, so these disciples who are willing to follow Christ over a cliff are just getting this profound bit of information from him. One of them will betray him, it will lead to his death. How would they have reacted? You look at all those Last Suppers from that time or before, they're pretty staid, right? I mean, it's a tricky
Wouldn't
painting
you
to
love to
paint.
photograph of that moment, the expression on everyone's face?
Yeah, and they're turning to each other. They're all having different reactions. They're how he painted them is informed by his understanding of all those things you just mentioned, anatomy,
Mhm.
physiology, geometry. He sets them in this complicated space. Christ is a little bit bigger. They're all having different reactions. Judas's veins are popping out of his neck. Thomas is gripping the knife more tightly. It's a movie unfolding in one single frame. You feel 3, 4, 5 seconds pass while you're looking at that. And so that separates his version of that from anyone's who came before, even though it's a moment that many have painted.
Yeah. Well, we tend to separate now. We're in our silos in modern culture. We
Mhm.
separate science and art and faith and literature and all that. But really, they're all the same thing. They all inform each other and always have.
Yeah, I mean, he blurred the lines between all of those things. If he were joining us in this conversation, he might be surprised to learn that we think of all those things as separate. And I mean, a painting to him can be an experiment. If he wants to understand why the sky is the color blue, he might climb into the mountains north of Milan, make a bunch of observations, use geometry, use his understanding of weather, put that down, go back into his studio, and then in the background behind the St. Anne, he could work out the why it's blue at a certain altitude and a lighter shade at a
Mhm.
lower altitude. What does the moisture in the air have to do with why it is a particular shade? How much slant there is on the light? I mean, to him, he didn't finish everything that he did, but I sometimes wonder if he was trying to answer those questions, maybe when he found them out, he moved on to something
Yeah.
else. So we get this unfinished piece of art, but if we look at the background, we might begin to imagine that what he was doing on that panel was an experiment.
And sometimes you find something out in an experiment and you move on to the next thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've become very specialized in the modern world. Like, I am an expert in the year 1630 in Brussels. Like, and there's a bit of a disdain sometimes in academia for the generalist,
hmm
for the self-taught, for the autodidacts and the polymaths. And I'm like, they're absolutely necessary because somebody's got to bring all the silos together.
Yeah. And there's a lot less, innovation and sort of successful experimentation since World War II than there was before that. And I wonder if it's not because we have put these silos in place and we allow particular types of minds to toil only in one of those silos. That's what was great about those bodegas is that they really were learning math and science in the service of painting.
Mm-hmm.
So they didn't think of those things as separate. And so when he ends up in Milan on the court of the Duke there, he's encountering scientists, doctors, poets. The Duke had put together this impressive court, and so he can get all that he needs to from them. Oh, I should go to the doctor and get this particular text. I've always wanted to read it. But at the same time, he kind of disdains they've been properly educated, and he's got a chip on his shoulder about that. And he's
I wonder
saying,
sometime if education narrows the mind in certain cases rather
yeah.
than broadening it.
It's one of the places where you can see in his writing that he does have a little bit of a attitude. He wants to be seen as an intellectual, and he's leaving behind all these treatises. They don't get published in his lifetime, but they're really intense studies of all the things we've been talking about. And a lot of that is what he's learned from the ancients, that he's read himself, or that he's had learned in exchange with people who have been more properly educated while sharing space with them on this court. And so he's sort of using it all, but you can see a kind of confidence in that he knows the right way to get educated, which is, yeah, read the texts, but challenge them, challenge the ancients, challenge the church, and at the same time, go out into nature, observe, and come up with your own conclusions, and then put it all together for whatever it is you're working on.
Yeah. I'm just reading a book called The Lodger, which is about a court case that involved William Shakespeare.
Okay.
He was a witness in a court case against involving one of his neighbors. And in going into the court case and drawing out all the details of the neighborhood and the people and everything, like the most amazing thing. So, like, whoever would have thought to do that? Because it's one of the few times that his words are recorded. So let's go find
Ah,
out, where did he live? How did he know these people? How did he get involved in this court case? And I'm like,
fascinating.
mind blown.
That's amazing.
It is.
Yeah, right. Getting a little closer to him than the works allow you to. That's
Exactly.
with Leonardo, it's similar in that when he's writing about, which he rarely does about that sort of thing, you do begin to sense more layers. It's not strictly the joy in pursuit of knowledge. It's also like, oh, I was irked because this German mirror maker was stealing my secrets. You go, oh, Leonardo can get a little bit, annoyed at times, and then we feel a little closer to him.
I also like the idea that he was um, socially conversant. He was pleasant to be with. He was fun company because we think of tortured artists and tortured poets and obsessive scientists hunched over a lab bench. You don't think of someone who's a genius and yet fun to be around. I love that idea.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's really only from contemporary accounts that we understand that he was a joy to be around. But this is a guy who loved to play music. He wrote jokes that he shared with the court. He staged big festivals, on behalf of the Duke for a niece who's getting married.
Yeah, he
Um,
designed sets and costumes and all sorts
yeah,
of fun things.
he's the life of the party, is what it seems. And that doesn't emerge from those notebooks or what he left behind. But no, he does not seem to be tortured. Michelangelo left behind poetry that suggested all of the pains that he experienced emotionally. And that may have been the case, but we don't
Yeah.
see it. It's a little bit liberating, and because then we can really turn our attention to the works and to the stuff that really occupied his days. And then I think when you look closely, what you can see between those lines is how much joy that he did derive from all this seeking.
And there's a lot of speculations about his personal life. Like, was he homosexual? Was he not? But he didn't seem that interested in talking about his personal life.
Mhm.
And he's just, this is my stuff and this is what I'm doing and this is what I want to pay attention to, not all the details of my personal life.
Yeah, so he did have an apprentice, Salai, who historians believe was probably a lover. They were together for decades. He came as an apprentice and he's there till nearly the end. Um, and there are some notes in the margins of these notebooks that suggest a complexity in their relationship. It's widely accepted that he was gay. Florence at that time was a place where you could be gay without running afoul of the church. That wasn't maybe true earlier or later, but in that period, it was. I mean, Germans used to refer to gay people as Florenzers because they knew that Florence was a place that was okay and to be gay
Florenzers.
at that time.
I never
Florenzers.
heard that.
Yeah, bisexual lovers, homosexual lovers, it seemed accepted. But the historical
Oh, has
record
there
on
ever been a time that artists were not complicated?
Princes of the
Complicated
Mind is,
people.
yeah. Right. And so, you know, you can, the historical record is so thin on his life, he doesn't say anything about it. There is a court case that we talk about in the film, an accusation of sodomy, which was resolved without punishment as far as we know. But that's it. And so, we're not going to do any speculating, but we'll go with what people accept the reality is. And we do know that that was a place where you could be gay without ending up in prison or worse.
You spend a lot of time pointing forward to the Mona Lisa. It doesn't come in
Mhm.
until quite late. You do not have Salvator Mundi, which has been a lot in the news in
Mhm.
the last few years. So, what is the choice of centering Mona Lisa toward the end? Because it's
That's a great
probably his
question.
best known work. But
Yeah.
so, what was the dramatic choice in putting
Yeah.
that together?
Yeah, we are taking a little license and putting it where we are, but we think rightfully so. The painting was commissioned probably around 1502. He carried it with him unfinished for the rest of his life. So you have to assume the merchant who commissioned it expected to get it within 2 or 3 years and never did, and probably was upset and moved on. And so to our mind, you hear about the Mona Lisa from the account of an assistant to a cardinal who visits him in France towards the end of his life. He shows him three paintings, including the Mona Lisa, which he seems to be working on still to that day. This is, 1518 and or 1516, somewhere in that area. Anyway, the reason we put it towards the end is because it seems to be the culmination of a life's work exploring nature, trying to understand the human mind, trying to breathe an inner life into his subjects, in particular women. It wasn't common for a painter to try to give a woman an inner life in a painting. You would see them in profile. He's got,
Or in Michelangelo's work, they just look like guys,
yeah, right.
like 60% like a guy.
Yeah.
So he didn't even think about making them all that different from the guys. He was just like,
I mean, I love
there we
the way
are.
that Leonardo portrays Mary across all of his works. So you can
Yeah.
just see a woman who has an ambivalence about this higher calling of her son and also a maternal instinct to want to protect this child that is hers. That would be really complex, and Leonardo seems to be fascinated by that. But with the Mona Lisa, you get all of these studies in geology and water and atmospheric perspective in the motions of the mind poured into this one painting. And it feels like a destination that we reach after our 4 hours or should reach toward the end of our 4 hours of exploring Leonardo's life. And so we're justified in putting it there. We are not hiding the ball. But I think the revelation is you've just learned all about Leonardo's life. Maybe we'll all together see this painting more deeply than we've become accustomed to seeing it. It hangs in the Louvre. People
Yeah.
go, they want to get a selfie, they travel a long way. Maybe they never even look at it. It's very crowded. So
Pop
hopefully we're
culture
all,
has used it
yeah,
1,000
yeah,
ways.
yeah. And the Salvator Mundi, it's, that we talk to everybody about that painting, and there really is, there's a camp that says, not enough of that is by him to give him authorship. And there's a camp that says there's enough of it that's by him. And I've listened to the arguments about this passage. It clearly could not have been done by him. Look at the math in that. It doesn't add
Mm.
up. It's not what Leonardo would have done. Um, I think the really interesting thing to us was the fact that it sold for $400 million, and then on top of that, another 50 million that would go to Christie's as a fee. And it suggests to me an endless fascination with
And I
Leonardo.
don't even
And
think
then
it's on display. It supposedly
it,
went to the Louvre in Dubai, but
that's
I
right.
don't think it's on display.
I don't think so either. When last I checked, it was still out of sight and probably, in the possession of, um, I forget who it is that purchased it, but on a yacht or somewhere, who knows, but not at that museum that you just mentioned. And so in the end, it was someone else can make a movie about that painting and where it
Oh, and
is
they
today.
have.
And they have.
They
And
have.
we've seen them. And our job, it felt like, was maybe to point at it along with some other things that we feel like suggest still a profound interest in his life and his contributions.
And speaking of like waiting for technology to catch up, we now have the digital technology for you to kind of bring those notebooks to life in a
Mm.
way that might have been more awkward 10 or 15 years ago.
Mhm.
So thank goodness for that.
Yeah, I mean, what's in the notebooks is, to me, is perhaps a more profound legacy than the paintings, because the imagination really lives in those notebooks and those machines that he's designing. I mean, some of them are informed by earlier designs. At some point, he realizes with many of them, this would never work. We don't have the materials to make the thing.
Yeah.
If it's a human-powered flying contraption, the body isn't strong enough to actually get this design
You need some
airborne.
aluminum, you need some fiberglass, you
Yeah,
need some
it's like
you
so
need
many
some
of those things in
things.
those notebooks, we see 400 years later that someone else came to the same conclusion, and using today's technology or math, they could actually see it through and get it to work. But that's where imagination comes in. He was just seeing these things out ahead of everybody else and maybe understood that they wouldn't work, but still wanted to try to get them right. And then you can pick them apart and say, oh, yeah, you can see these are bat wings. That's what he's doing here in the design of this machine. And it does seem like we continue to turn to him to try to make sense of whatever revolution is unfolding, whether it's the industrial revolution or the
Yeah.
digital revolution, that there's something in those notebooks that just makes us understand what's going on today a little bit better.
It also points up like the in the general ecosystem, your your kings and your queens, your rich people, your rich merchants, your dukes and what have you, or whatever equivalencies we have in the modern world. They play a vital role. A lot of artists would not have created, they would have
Yeah.
starved to death. Not too many people who live paycheck to paycheck can afford to be a patron of the arts. So, as much as we rail against people with extra income and extra money, there's a lot we wouldn't have if they didn't exist and they weren't willing, for whatever reason of their own,
Yeah.
to patronize artists, musicians, whatever it is.
It's true. His one way to look at his life is the constant pursuit of patronage that will allow him to do something to
Bills got to
pursue.
be paid.
He's got to be paid. He's got to eat. And so he's designing war machines for Cesare Borgia, a kind of warlord who controlled a chunk of central Italy in the around 1500. And at the same time, he's writing about war and drawing about war, and making it pretty clear that he finds it, bestial madness, as he describes it, right? But the machines he's designing and the way that he presents them to the Duke of Milan or Cesare Borgia, he's doing a real good job of salesmanship, trying to get them to believe that he's capable of making these things, right? And so you can only imagine that he's willing to do some of this so that he can eat,
Yeah.
and a lot of those notebooks that he left behind, whether it's study of water dynamics or birds in flight, no one's commissioning those. He's just doing that out of a sense that he needs to keep seeking and answering the questions that he's posing. But the paintings are, of course, all commissions. And so he's using those both to satisfy his patron to make a living, and also to discover something else that he's seeking to know. And so I find the commissions from the church remarkable, because he is, in many cases, honoring what it is has been asked of him, but he's finding new layers in these very old stories that have been painted many times that are fascinating. He's interested in the humans they are what they are as they are described in the Bible, but he's interested in the humanity of the people who are in the paintings. It's very interesting.
Reminds me just the thought just a little bit of the way Jordan Peterson digs into the Old Testament and tries to find the underlying psychology
Mm.
in the stories rather
Mhm.
than just the theology.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know Jordan Peterson, but I think that's
He's
exactly
very
right.
big. He has a whole book on that.
Okay.
Yeah.
The Monsignor Timothy Verdon, who appears in our film, and he is a Florence-based reverend who is also a celebrated art historian. And that, to me, his understanding of the humanity of the characters, the oft-painted characters of these well-known biblical stories, it was sort of separating Leonardo from other artists. Well, that opened my eyes, and just again that I talked about Mary earlier, and that just in the Madonna and Child or on Saint Anne's lap, whatever it is, that you can just see how profound all this information would have been to her and how much she would have struggled to master it all.
Like what Michelangelo captured in his Pietà,
Hmm.
the anguish of a human being
Yep.
at the moment of great loss.
Yeah, they're works that can really stop you. And I hope in the movie we spend enough time sort of living in them. So if you can't get there to see them, and we didn't see all of them, that you can at least look at them long enough to have a different sense of what they are. And then
If you
hopefully
see it better than you would in a museum.
yeah. Yeah.
I know there's like some digital technology they've used on the Mona Lisa to
Mm,
get through the layers of lacquer and the layers of to show that
the
she's not a
veil.
blob.
Yeah.
It's a veil.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the veil has become obscured over time to sort of give you an idea of what the painting looked like when it was new. Because we look at a lot of things. People say, oh, go look at, Dusty Temple somewhere. I'm like, honestly, I'd rather see a digital representation of what it looked like when it was new, because that I can't see. I want
Well,
to know
it's
what it looked like to the people who saw it in their time.
yes.
Please
Well,
do that more.
it seems likely that the Louvre will undertake a restoration of the Mona Lisa very soon. So if that comes off the
I'm a
wall for
little
a couple of
scared.
years, it is,
I'm a little
and it's, I
scared.
mean, they know what they're doing. It's if you
Yeah.
go look at the Saint Anne, which is, some rooms away in the same building, you will get a painting that is closer to what it probably looked like when Leonardo put it
Mm.
down for the last time. And it has a certain vibrancy to it. The colors feel saturated in a different way. But Mona Lisa, like to touch it in any way again would perhaps to would be to violate a kind of relationship that the culture now has with that painting.
Yeah.
Could it suddenly look
Well,
different?
because these worked, I think if you asked any artist, any writer, composer, filmmaker, whatever, writer, author, what would make you the happiest? To be to create something that lives on after you. And whether it's Sherlock Holmes, or it's Charles Dickens's characters or whatever, they take on a life of their own. And people have a relationship with them in the moment in which they meet them.
Yeah,
So at some point it ceases to be just what it was and it becomes all the things that it has become
yeah.
over
Maybe
the
not
years.
more true than with any work than the Mona Lisa. I
Mm-hmm.
wonder what he would say to see what Marcel Duchamp did by drawing a mustache on her, or to watch as we use iPhones to take pictures and blast them out to our social media feeds. I wonder what he would say.
I did. They like it. They like me. They really like it. Really like it. I don't know. So what's next? Now that you've delved beyond America and into the Renaissance, what comes next?
Yeah, so Ken has for years been working on a film about the American Revolution, which will premiere next November. That was made by a different team. My wife and I, who was my co-producer on this film, have been making with Ken or we're underway on a film that will be about the Black experience in the United States from emancipation to the beginning of the Great Migration. So like a 60-year period, the center of which is Reconstruction, a period
Mm-hmm.
which is pretty well misunderstood. And
Yeah, I
this is a
read
film.
Chernow's biography of U.S. Grant, and it goes
Mhm.
a lot into that, and it blew my mind, things I had no idea.
Yeah, I think that there was a way that it was taught and remembered in the early 20th century that served that kind of lost cause mythology, and that in the second half of the 20th century, historians did a better job of trying to make sense of what actually happened
Hmm.
in that period. It's a film Ken has wanted to make since he completed his Civil War film. It felt like a
Hmm.
sequel. And so we're just
So,
underway with that.
back to America.
That, yes. Yep.
I want him to do football. I want
Football.
him to do football. He
He
did
is a
baseball.
big
Come
football
on.
fan.
Throw me a
Yeah.
bone. Want him to do football.
He
From
is
the
a
beginnings in college football right up through the birth of the of professional football.
I think it's great. I think he would enjoy that. He is almost as much a football fan as he is a baseball fan.
What's
Uh,
his team?
he's a Patriots fan.
Well, I have to forgive that. He's in New Hampshire.
Well, he had 20 years of things going well for him. So
And
thank
now
you,
the
Tom Brady.
pennants. And now
Yeah.
the pennants because
Yeah,
it's
there seems to be an
inevitable.
understanding that it might be a minute until there's another rise
Yep.
to glory.
Yep. It's the ebb and flow of any given Sunday.
hmm No,
Possibly the
and I
greatest
have
film
been
ever about football. But
watched
yeah.
his team uh
Oh, there you go.
dominate my team for 20 plus years. I think
Yeah.
Tom Brady was something like 38-1 against the Buffalo Bills across his career. And
I think
so,
you ended a winning streak yesterday. I think there was a
indeed, I'm
winning
glad you
streak
caught
that
that.
came to an end yesterday.
Yes, I might have attended that game.
You might have attended
I
that
might have,
game.
yes. It
Sorry,
was a lot of
sorry,
fun.
Pat Mahomes. Yeah, I'm a Seahawks fan, and we
Okay,
ended a 6 game losing streak, so it was a happy day for all.
that's excellent. Yep. There are a lot
over
of
our
happy Buffalonians.
over our hated rivals, the
Right, the Niners?
49ers. It
Yeah,
beat the
okay. Oh,
Niners.
you
I
were
know,
due for
right? You
that.
know what that means. Yeah, we
Yes.
haven't done it since December of 2021.
Yeah.
Yippee yay. So yeah, football. It is currently, I have to say, except during the World Series, America's game.
I would not disagree.
Yep.
Said a
Well, thank you.
lifelong baseball fan.
So what is the one thing you would like people to most pay attention to in Leonardo? Because it's 4 hours, there's a lot there, but what is
Yeah.
the thing you hope most gets through?
I mean, I think that if there's one thing to take away from his life, it's the depths of his curiosity and the seeking, driven by an obsessiveness, driven by an imagination like no one before him. But it's a kind of dedication to seeing the world in a way that no one had before, and knowing more about it than anyone had before. And then using all that knowledge to leave behind a legacy of notebooks that explain things that no one had considered or that people hadn't been able to understand. It's that curiosity and seeking. If we are all a little bit more like that, I think the world would be a richer place.
Always ask why.
Mhm. Yes.
Well, thank you much for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Kate.
Have a great
Appreciate it.
day.
You too. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.